Hello again. This is your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian. I think the new name of the channel is a lot more fitting of the content that's being released. I hope it's okay with everyone. As I said in the last video, I am doing a giveaway to win a copy, my only copy, of this book, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Suffer the Children. All you have to do is be a subscriber and answer the following question. How did Kat like to wear her hair? What color did she dye it? Give me the answer in the comments section on this video or the previous one. And out of the correct answers, I will pick a lucky subscriber and I will be shipping them this, my only copy of A Nightmare on Elm Street, Suffer the Children by David Bishop. And now, the conclusion of A Nightmare on Elm Street, Suffer the Children. Chapter 17. Williams had seen some horror shows in his time. You didn't get to be sheriff in a place like Springwood, with all its troubles, without witnessing the worst that humanity could do. But the bloodbath inside the Sutherland house beggared belief. What kind of animal could commit such an atrocity? To skin a teenage girl's corpse was bad enough, but to have done it while she was still alive? Williams couldn't have thought that possible if the coroner hadn't suggested it after he finished throwing up in the bathroom. Then there was the gutting of the body before it was tossed down the stairs like a dirty pillowcase, empty and unwanted. What the fuck was this town coming to? Williams didn't want to believe Kruger was back, but shit like this was making that hard to maintain. Hell, America had seen teenage rampages turn high schools into slaughterhouses, but that was with guns. Even freaks like Bundy and Manson would blink twice before turning the prom queen into so much chopped meat. No, whatever was behind this, it was a sickness beyond anything even Springwood had witnessed before. The sheriff turned away, unable to take it in. Something worse than Kruger that didn't bear thinking about. He would see this grisly business through to its conclusion, and then he would resign and take early retirement. He'd be lucky if he didn't end up eating a bullet within a year as a way of getting this nightmare out of his thoughts. After seeing all he ever wanted to, and plenty more inside the house, the sheriff staggered back outside, hungry for clean air. He had asked Goodman to take the Corwin girl's mother to one side for questioning. Goodman had seen Alex and two other kids fleeing the house immediately after police entered the property. Williams found it hard to believe teenagers could have committed this heinous crime, but Taubman's description of Alex's psyche from the previous night was still ringing in his ears. Delusional, sociopathic, multiple personality disorder, a danger to others as well as herself. None of that would be admissible in court, thanks to doctor-patient confidentiality, but it was vital for knowing what they were dealing with. Alex Corwin was a menace, and she had to be stopped. Maybe she had formed some sort of death pact with the other kids at the drug trial. Hell, maybe these psychotic episodes were happening as a result of a side effect of the serum they were given. He'd read about cases where kids who took PCP tried to eat each other like they were cannibals. Maybe the serum had a similar effect? I don't know the answers, the sheriff thought bleakly, but I do know this. 2 teenagers are dead, and Alex Corwin was seen near both bodies in suspicious circumstances. Maybe she was right. Maybe Kruger was back, terrorizing Springwood once more. Or maybe it was Alex herself causing these deaths. Whichever was true, they had to find her and lock her away. Sorting out the consequences of what had happened in the last few days could wait for later. Stopping the killings? That was all that mattered now. Having made up his mind, he strode over to Mrs. Corwin. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm Sheriff Williams. Have you seen your daughter at all today?" "Yes, of course. I left her at home this morning when I went to work. I was driving home to check on her when I saw all the police cars outside this house and stopped to see what had happened." "A murder," Williams replied, not wanting to elaborate. "One of your daughter's classmates is dead." "Oh my God," Miss Corwin whispered. "Do you know who's responsible?" "We're still investigating. The reason I asked about your daughter is that, well, she was seen fleeing the scene as my men arrived." "Alex? But that's impossible. She's at home." "Not anymore." The sheriff was forced to admit. "I've had my men watching your house, but Alex snuck out shortly after noon today." "Hold on a second. You've had men watching my house? Why?" Oh boy, William thought. Now the shit really hits the fan. He recounted what Taubman had told him. the other incidents involving Alex, and vaguely hinted at his own suspicions about Mrs. Corwin's daughter. She did not take it well. Dr. Taubman should not have shared that information with you, Sheriff. It's a clear breach of my daughter's civil rights, especially as Alex is still a minor. Anything Taubman said is illegally obtained information. My lawyer will hear about this. What about the dead girl in that house? William spat back at her. What about her rights? She's been flayed alive, gutted, and thrown down a staircase, and your daughter was spotted fleeing the scene. How am I supposed to interpret that scenario? Perhaps your lawyer can help me with that, too? This is ridiculous. I know my daughter Alexandra may be a little unstable, a little on edge, but she is not a murderer, Sheriff. You've met her. You can't honestly believe she would kill her classmates, can you? I don't know what to believe anymore, ma'am, he said quietly, but I've got 2 suspicious deaths, and your daughter has links with both of them. We need to find Alex. If she is a danger to others, then she needs treatment. For all we know, she could be in danger too. If that's the case, we need to protect her. Either way, we have to find her, and we need to find her now. Williams could see Mrs. Corwin was struggling to cope with all this. He placed a comforting hand on her arm. I know Taubman should not have told me what he did, but that can't be undone now. The most important thing is finding Alex before somebody else gets hurt, including her. Now, do you have any idea where your daughter might be? I don't know, she sobbed, losing control of her emotions. Think. Where has Alex gone lately? Has she made any new friends? Mrs. Corwin pushed the tears from her eyes, smearing mascara across her cheeks. Peter. She's been hanging around with a boy called Peter O'Mahony. He lives further along Elm Street, and Principal Shea mentioned another student too, Christopher something. Harris, I think. Christopher Harris. What about places she hangs out? Anywhere Alex told you she was going, particularly in the last few days? Mrs. Corwin sniffed, trying to pull herself together. The hospital. She went to Springwood General to visit a friend. I remember Alex mentioning that to me. I'm sure of it. She looked hopefully at the sheriff. Does that help at all? He smiled at her encouragingly. Yes, that's a big help, Mrs. Corwin. I'll get my men looking for Alex immediately, with information that you've given us. Now, I suggest you go home and wait. I'll have a female officer sent round to keep you company. It's best you aren't alone at a time like this. The sheriff watched as she stumbled away. Once Mrs. Corwin was out of earshot, he activated his radio. Lois, this is the sheriff. I need you to find home addresses for 2 students at Springwood High. One Peter O'Mahony and one Christopher Harris. At least one of them lives on Elm Street. Send a car over to the hospital. Have it look for Alex Corwin. Goodman should be able to supply a description of what the girl is wearing. And also have a female officer go to 1428 Elm Street to keep Mrs. Corwin company. You've got all that? Over. Stop! Alex was out of breath. Her side was hurting like hell, and running in combat boots was murder. She slowed down and then stopped completely, unable and unwilling to go any further for the moment. Ahead of her, Chris and Peter paused to look back. We can't keep running away, she gasped. The police will find us sooner or later. She's right, Peter told Chris. But what about Heather? He protested. She's dead, Alex said sadly, slowly getting her breath back. There's nothing we can do to bring her back, Chris. And you're just going to accept that? It's a fact, Chris. Unless you're planning on resurrecting her, the dead stay dead. That's it. Game over. What about Kruger? He demanded. That bastard died 2 generations ago and he's still haunting us. He's killing us. I know, Alex agreed. What do you think we should do? We could fight him, Peter suggested. The others looked at him. If we don't want to kill each other or get killed, we have to beat him somehow. With what? Chris sneered. You said it yourself. We've got these abilities. We should use them against Kruger. Give him a taste of his own medicine. Peter's eyes lit up at the idea. We could go into training, learn how to turn our talents into weapons against him. Chris shook his head. We haven't got time for that. Besides, we're not the motherfucking X-Men. What's next, uniforms and shit? Peter's face fell. It was only an idea. You're both right, Alex decided. We've got to try to fight Kruger, but we haven't got time to prepare. We need to figure out a way to beat him." A police siren wailed in the distance, cutting through their words. Alex looked around guiltily. "We need to hide someplace the cops won't find us." Peter smiled. "The hospital Zen garden. Nobody goes there except you, Alex." "Good enough," she agreed. "Chris, let's go." Chris was already off and running, Peter following his lead. Alex took a deep breath and went after them. It was Goodman who smelled it first, a hungry scent that gnawed at your stomach, making your mouth water involuntarily. In his opinion, there was nothing better than the smell of roasting meat. As a boy, he'd dutifully gone to church every Sunday, putting up with the stiff-collared shirt and ugly plaid tie, knowing what was waiting ahead. A roast lunch at his grandma's house with all the trimmings. Oftentimes, she'd cook a side of beef and one of pork as well, keeping aside some crackling for her favorite grandson. The roasted potatoes would be heaped on his plate like a mountain, along with butter beans and zucchini and enough gravy to drown it all. God, thinking about it was making him hungry, but his grandma was dead and gone, along with their Sunday lunches. Probably just as well, otherwise he'd be over 200 pounds by now. The smell of roasted meat seeped from the front door of the Harris house. It was a modest property compared to most of the homes along Elm Street, but neatly kept all the same. With everyone still at the Sutherland place, Goodman had been ordered to visit both the Harris and O'Mahony homes as part of the search for Alex and her friends. The Harris place was closer, so it came first. Goodman pressed the doorbell again, having gotten no response the first time. He was all too aware of Officer Malone beside him, waiting impatiently and examining the chipped varnish on her nails. They had been partnered after the fiasco at that damn girl's house earlier in the day. "If you can't be trusted to use your brains, I'll have to put someone in the car with you who's got some," the sheriff had shouted. Goodman didn't mind. Malone was kind of cute, if a little dumpy. "I wonder if she's seeing anyone." "What's that smell?" Malone asked, sniffing the air. "Roasting meat." "Who roasts meat on a Tuesday afternoon?" she wondered. Good point," Goodman conceded. After still getting no response from the doorbell, he peered through the windows into the hallway. There was a shape lying on the carpet, tendrils of smoke drifting lazily upwards from it. No, not a shape, but a person. "Oh, shit," Goodman whispered. "I think I see a body inside." "Terrific." Malone drew her weapon and stepped away from the door. "Just get back, I'm going to kick it in," she announced. The door splintered inwards at the first impact of her police-issue boots. Another kick and it swung aside. Smoke billowed out, briefly clouding the hallway from view. When it cleared, both officers could see what was on the floor. Gideon Harris was reaching towards them, hands stretched out in supplication, lips pulled back from his teeth as if screaming. But he was obviously dead, apparently burnt alive where he lay. "Oh, good God," Goodman gulped. "That wasn't roasting meat we smelled." Malone grimaced. "It was roasting flesh. Human flesh." Goodman was too busy barfing on the lawn to agree with her. It was nearly 4 when Alex, Chris, and Peter reached the Zen garden. Chris sank onto the stone bench and put his head in his hands, his shoulders gently shaking. Peter watched from one side, exchanging glances with Alex. Alex was moving around the garden, thinking out loud. "Kruger is only supposed to attack us in our dreams. We know that much for certain. But all of us who took the serum are now linked. If one of us is dreaming, all of us are vulnerable." "So we took the hypnostill to stop ourselves from dreaming. That should have kept us safe," Peter replied. "But it didn't." "Right. The question is why not? Either the serum counteracts the effects of hypnosil, or something else does. If we could figure that out, we'd be safe from Kruger for a while." She stopped moving from stone to stone, suppressing a yawn. "I'm so tired. I can hardly think." "We all are," Chris murmured. "Kruger keeps attacking us when we sleep, wearing us down, not giving us a damn chance to think." "And each time he does, our fear grows and he gets stronger," Peter said. "What happens when Kruger gets strong enough to escape our dreams?" Alex wondered. "How will anyone be safe from him then?" "Like I said," Chris replied, "we've got to stop him while we can." "Hang on," Alex interjected. We were all awake when Kruger possessed Heather's body, right? None of us were dreaming then. The two boys looked at each other and nodded. Heather was already dead. So was Kat. None of us were dreaming. So how was Kruger able to manifest himself outside our dreams? How is that possible? It shouldn't be, Peter agreed. All 5 of us are accounted for. But there were 6 of us injected with the serum, Chris realized. Exactly. Lloyd? Peter shook his head. But he's in a... That doesn't mean he stopped dreaming, Alex said, cutting him off. Probably the reverse. Every time Lloyd begins dreaming, each of us is vulnerable to Kruger. It doesn't matter if we're awake or asleep, dreaming or not. Chris stood up. That bastard is using Lloyd like a battery, feeding off the power of his nightmares. For all we know, it's Kruger keeping Lloyd in a coma so he can sustain a link to all of us. Fuck! Why didn't we see this sooner? Alex smiled grimly. Because Kruger kept us so shit scared, so busy looking over our shoulders, we didn't have time to figure it out. He's been playing us from the start, toying with us, just like he said he would. So how do we stop him? Peter asked. Alex remembered Kat's vision about one of them murdering Lloyd. Killing him would sever the link between all of them and Kruger, but she had no intention of murdering someone to save herself. That would make her no better than Kruger himself. Well, Alex, you've got all the answers, Chris said. What do we do? We've got to find a way of waking Lloyd, she replied. While he stays in that coma, we'll never beat Kruger. Come on. Alex went to leave the garden, but stopped abruptly at the entrance. A police car was cruising the hospital grounds. 2 bored cops inside lazily scanning the surroundings. Alex pressed herself back into the bushes, keeping Chris and Peter behind her out of sight. The vehicle stopped outside the hospital's main entrance. You think they're looking for us? Chris whispered under his breath. Alex shrugged. We can't risk going past them. We'll have to wait them out. The sheriff was still standing outside the Sutherland house when the news came through about the burnt body further along Elm Street. Malone and Goodman had found a dead man roasted to a crisp at Christopher Harris's home. More accurately, Malone had found the body, since Goodman was still outside puking his guts up when Williams arrived. The sheriff tried to get some answers from Goodman without success. It was all the vomiting cop could manage to weakly jerk a thumb towards the house. Malone emerged from the front door as Williams approached. Dispatch says you've got a Burns victim in there. Does it look suspicious? The matter-of-fact female cop stepped aside so the sheriff could see the charred remains in the hallway. Goodman spotted the one through the window, so I kicked in the door. Once inside, I realized Mr. Crispy wasn't the only thing stinking the place out. We've got 2 more victims upstairs, both of them well done. 3 of a kind, you might say. Williams had to admire Malone's resolve. Most Springwood cops were like Goodman, weak-assed, weak-minded waste of space, busy, marking time until retirement. Malone had transferred in from Cincinnati, and there wasn't much that fazed her. Nothing useful left on their faces, and I haven't checked for ID yet, she continued, but I'd guess and say this one is the father, Gideon Harris. Upstairs you've got what looks like his wife. She's in the bedroom, fried alive on the mattress, and their young daughter. Girl can't have been much older than 7 or 8. Is she, Malone nodded, swallowing hard, torched, like her parents. She grimaced. We find the sick bastard who did this. I'm going to enjoy attending his execution. Pity we don't use the electric chair anymore. It'd be more poetic justice. Williams moved quickly through the house, confirming for himself what Malone had seen. Strangely, it was the mother's body that upset him more than that of the little girl. If the woman's corpse was that of Mrs. Harris, she'd been wearing a dressing gown like the one he'd bought his own wife last Christmas. A few scraps of singed fabric hung limply over the edge of the mattress, a mute testament to the ferocity of this murder. She must have burned to death in less than a minute. What kind of accelerant had the killer used to achieve such an effect? Strangely, there was none of the usual smells Williams associated with arson attacks. No gasoline stench, no whiff of alcohol in the air. If he didn't know any better, the sheriff might almost believe the poor souls had spontaneously combusted. He emerged from the house pale and sweating, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. He smiled at the female officer. Good work, Malone. You better stay here and keep the scene secure until the forensic team arrives. Could be hours before they get here. Mopping up what's left of Heather Sutherland has taken me some time." Malone nodded and shrugged. Goodman had recovered enough to stagger over and join the conversation. "I'll stay with Malone," he offered, still wiping the last flecks of puke from his chin. "Best if there's two of us here, in case the perp comes back." "Forget it," Williams snarled. "Malone can handle herself until another car arrives, and I doubt our perp is returning. You came here first, right?" Goodman nodded. "So nobody's been to the O'Mahony place yet?" "I guess not, Sheriff." "You guess not?" Williams activated his radio. "Dispatch. Put me through to the officer with Mrs. Corwin." Within a minute, the sheriff confirmed everything was fine at 1428 Elm Street. He marched towards his car. "Goodman, you're with me." "Where are we going?" "To do your job. Seems the only way I can trust you is if I come too." Alex and the others could hear the police car's radio crackling from their hiding place. From this distance, most of the messages were a haze of static and background noise, while the two cops in the car slumped in their seats. But a direct call roused the pair. "Sheriff wants you on Elm Street. Triple homicide. Officer on the scene. Needs backup until the coroner arrives. Get over there now," the voice said. "A triple homicide?" Chris glanced at the others, bewildered. "I don't understand. I thought only Heather was dead." "Shh!" Alex hissed. They listened intently as the cops in the car responded to their summons, asking for the full address. "It's 1498 Elm Street. 2 adults, 1 male, 1 female, and a girl. All burned alive. Sheriff suggests you stand guard outside. Leave the rest to the coroner." The police car drove away, leaving the hospital entrance unguarded. Peter started towards the main door, but neither Alex nor Chris moved. "That address, 1498, Alex said to Chris. "That's your place." "They're dead," he whispered. "Somebody murdered my family." "Burned them alive," Alex added. "What happened, Chris?" He took a few moments to react to her question. "What? Why'd you do it?" Chris laughed hollowly. "I don't believe this. You think I burned my own family to death? Are you out of your fucking mind?" Alex took a step back from him. "We all saw what you can do. What happens when you get angry. That's what Kruger wanted you to do. Let all that rage inside you escape so it burned and burned and burned. I can understand why you'd hurt your father, but why your mother and your little sister? What did they ever do to you, Chris?" His face was a mask of shock. He looked from Alex to Peter and then back again. "You can't think. You can't believe. I'd never hurt my mom or Marion. I loved them." "Loved them. Past tense. You say that like you've known they were dead for a while," Peter observed. Chris shook his head, his eyes brimming with tears. "How can you say these things to me? My family is dead and you're accusing me of killing them? This is fucking crazy. I didn't do it. You hear me? I didn't do it." "You made a deal with Kruger," Alex said softly, keeping her distance from Chris while edging closer to Peter. "I saw it in one of my dreams. You said you'd kill for him if it would save you. This was the price you had to pay, to become his disciple. I saw it all, Chris." He shook his head, seemingly unable to grasp what she was saying. "You saw me? But I wouldn't do that." "I didn't know it was you," Alex conceded. "But I knew it was one of us. Who else would have a reason to kill your family, Chris? Me? Peter? You heard what the police radio said. They were all burned alive. You must have done it." "But I don't. I couldn't have." "Kruger could have been controlling you when it happened," Peter said kindly. "He used you to hurt them. You probably weren't even aware that was happening when they died. It must have been like you were sleepwalking or something." Chris shook his head vehemently. "You're wrong, both of you. I haven't made any deal with Kruger, and I didn't murder my family. If they are dead, Kruger must have done it, and now he's framing me, making it look like I'm the murderer. But I'm innocent. I would never hurt my baby sister or my mom." "And your father?" "Yeah, I hurt him before, but that was an accident. I told you about that. I would never kill him, no matter how much I hate him." Chris held out his hands to them. "You've got to believe me. I didn't do this." "Chris, I'm sorry," Alex began. "Don't," he warned. "I can't believe you'd think I'd..." Chris gave up trying to persuade them and ran off, disappearing between the trees. Alex realized she'd been holding her breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Shit, I thought he was going to burn us too. Yeah, I kept expecting my clothes to catch fire. Peter frowned. God, you don't think he killed Heather too? No, he was more shocked than either of us about what happened to her. Another thought occurred to Alex. What if we're wrong about him, Peter? For all we know, Kruger's strong enough to kill for himself outside dreams. Maybe, Peter said. What can we do about it? Either way. Get Lloyd out of his coma like we planned. That'll take away one of Kruger's weapons against us. She shook hold of Peter's left hand and led him to the hospital entrance, eager to get inside. Roy yawned and stretched, determined to stay awake. Once visiting hours were over for the afternoon, the burns unit fell quiet as the grave. Several patients had been released yesterday, and none of the children's beds were occupied for the first time in more than a month. Roy was glad of that. He hated seeing young patients brought in with burns. They faced years of treatment and skin grafts to repair damage done in the moment, usually one of carelessness. But he was often as sad to see them leave. Despite their injuries, kids brought a life and vitality to the place adult burns victims seldom did. Take the patient in the last room on the left. Lloyd didn't have any burns, but Roy had seen enough of that ravaged face to know the patient would never be the life and soul of the party ever again. If Lloyd ever came out of his coma, that was. So it was with some surprise Roy noted the blinking red light indicating that the call button had been activated in Lloyd's room. Nobody had visited the comatose teenager today, so either someone else was pushing the button or else Lloyd had come out of his coma. Roy hurried along the corridor to the last door on the left and walked inside. So, feeling better, buddy? But Lloyd was exactly as he'd been when Roy last checked in on him an hour earlier. There was nobody else in the room either. Then who pushed the call button? Roy stuck his head back out into the corridor. Is anyone out there? No reply. Maybe it was a problem with the button itself. These things sometimes went on the fritz. Roy approached the bed and leaned over the patient to get a better look. Excuse me, Lloyd? He muttered, pressing his head against the wall to see if something was amiss with the button. You're excused, you fat fuck! Roy jumped backward, startled by the snarling, sneering voice. He searched the room, but still couldn't see anyone else present. I'm over here, loser! The orderly jumped again and then smiled with relief. It was Lloyd after all. The voice had come from Lloyd. Jesus, you scared the shit out of me, man. Well, I was wondering what the stench was. Hey, Lloyd, there's no need to be abusive, Roy warned. Why the fuck not? I know you're just woken up from a coma, but that's no excuse for being rude, okay? Come here and say that, Blint boy. Roy scowled. He'd only known Lloyd a few moments, and already he was hating this guy. Maybe I should get a transfer to another unit. I don't like the idea of looking after this asshole for the next few months. Roy stepped closer to the bed. I said there's no call for you to be abusive, Lloyd. We'll see about that. One of the patient's hands emerged from beneath the sheet. The overweight orderly thought it strange his patient was wearing an old leather glove. And stranger still, there were 4 knives protruding from the ends of its fingers. Then the blades were slicing his throat, and Roy didn't have much time left for any more thinking. He staggered back across the room and into the door, a spray of crimson misting the air, great gouts of blood spurting from between his fingers. Roy gasped and tried to call for help, but all he could hear was the wet flapping of his windpipe, air whistling in and out of the slices cut through it. His legs gave way and Roy slumped to the floor, urine and blood poiling around him. One cut to the carotid artery in the neck, and you could bleed to death in less than 30 seconds. Roy remembered that from his medical training. His carotid had been severed 4 times. Does that mean I'll die 4 times as fast? Kruger pulled back the sheet and arose from the bed, his phantom form solidifying as it escaped Lloyd's body. He brushed down the dirty red and green striped sweater before adjusting the angle of his battered brown fedora. Kruger wiped the blood off his fingerknives onto his jeans, adding a fresh stain to the others. He smiled, cruel lips curling upward slightly. It's good to be back. Kruger glanced over his shoulder at Lloyd, the comatose teenager still lying in the hospital bed. Thanks for the ride, kid. Keep up the good work. Laughing to himself, Kruger strode to the door and tried to pull it open. but Roy's corpse was slumped against it, blocking the exit. Kruger walked through the wall instead, fading like a wraith, then becoming solid again in the corridor. He sniffed the air and grinned hungrily. "Smells like teen spirit. Time for a little hide-and-seek." Alex and Peter hurried through the hospital's labyrinth-like corridors. They rounded a corner to find the burns unit's double doors standing wide open. Alex paused, uncertainty clouding her face. "Last time I came here, I got buzzed in by an orderly. He said the hospital had tightened security after a baby was snatched last year." "So?" Alex pointed at the open doors. "Does that look secure to you?" "No, but that's not our problem, is it?" "Yes, it is," she insisted. "He's already here." "Who? Chris? He left." "Kruger." Peter glanced uncertainly at the doors again. "How can you tell?" "I can feel him. Like someone scratching the back of my mind," she said, shuddering at the sensation. "He's close. He's really close." Peter pulled her arm, dragging her closer to the burns unit. "Then the sooner we get inside and wake Lloyd, the better, right?" "I don't know. It feels different this time." "Alex, come on." Peter let go of her and marched through the open doors. He turned around and folded his arms. "See? Nothing to worry about." "I guess." Reluctantly, she followed him into the burns unit hallway. No sooner had Alex stepped through the double doors than they slammed shut behind her. Deadbolts and electronic locks clicking into place. "Fuck, I knew it," she cursed. "It's a trap. Kruger's setting a trap for us." Peter tried to undo the locks, but they stayed shut, the doors resisting all his efforts to move them. Alex punched the switch to open them, but it did not respond. Peter fetched a chair from one side of the corridor and smashed it against the reinforced glass door panels, again and again until he was out of breath. They cracked, but they did not shatter. "It's no use," he conceded. "We can't get out this way." "I'll get the orderly," Alex decided. She ran to Roy's office, but it was empty. A newspaper chain cut into a line of children holding hands was draped across the desk. Roy's scissors lying beside it. "He's not in there," she said, emerging from the office. "He must be with one of the patients." The two teenagers hurried along the corridor, checking the rooms. As they reached each doorway, it slammed shut, locks clicking into place, shutting them out. Alex could see patients inside the rooms, fear and concern on their faces. Some tried to open the doors or windows, without success. Peter called to her from the other side of the hall. "Alex, it's him!" She ran to Peter, who was pointing through a glass panel in one of the locked doors. Inside, Kruger was terrorizing a young woman, whose legs were wrapped in gauze and bandages. She was trying to escape through a window, but Kruger had one of her ankles in his left hand, while the four blades of his gloved hand sliced into her thighs, cutting and slashing, blood splashing the clean white floor. Alex tried to shut out the woman's screams, but they echoed in her head. The woman's fear like knives in Alex's mind. It was almost a relief when the woman died, a red pool spreading outwards from her twitching corpse. "You bastard!" Peter howled at Kruger through the door. "You want to kill someone? Why don't you come after us?" "Good idea," the monster replied and strode towards them. Kruger laughed as he shimmered through the wall before solidifying once more in the corridor with them. "You were saying?" He licked the dead patient's blood from each of his finger knives in turn, not flinching when the blade sliced through his tongue. "So much for the appetizer. Bring on the entree." "No!" Peter stepped in front of Alex. "I won't let you hurt her too." Kruger smiled and winked at Alex. "I think he's got a crush on you." Peter looked around and saw the discarded chair way down the double doors. He reached a hand towards it, beckoning the chair closer, but it didn't move. Kruger's mocking laughter echoed loudly in the corridor. "What's the matter, Peter? Can't get it up?" Peter closed his eyes, the strain of concentration evident on his face. The chair began to twitch in response, slowly sliding across the floor towards him. "It's moving," Alex gasped. "Peter, you're doing it." He smiled and clenched his hand into a fist, then flung it towards Kruger. The chair mimicked his movement, crumpling into a ball of metal before shooting through the air. It punched into Kruger's chest, knocking the maniac 20 feet backward in the air. He thudded into the far wall and slumped to the floor. "I did it," Peter said disbelievingly, but Kruger shook himself awake and began getting up again. "Is that the best you've got, shithead?" Peter sent another chair hurtling towards the tormentor, then another. But Kruger brushed them aside as if the metal missiles were no more than crumpled pieces of paper. Slowly, remorselessly, he advanced on Peter and Alex. Peter looked around, but there was no more furniture to use as ammunition. Kruger grabbed him by the throat and threw him through the door of the butchered woman's room. The teenager's glasses flew off as he hit the floor, one leg folding awkwardly beneath him in the pool of blood, his body still and lifeless. "No!" Alex whispered, her attention focused on Peter, willing him to get up, to give her some sign he was still alive. "No!" "Forget that little shit," Kruger whispered in her ear. "You want a real man between your legs, Alex? Come to Daddy." "Fuck you," she snarled, ramming an elbow into his nose and smashing the bones backwards through his brain. He went down with an anguished cry of surprise, black blood spurting from his features. Alex ran, desperate to get away from this monster. "I've got to get Lloyd," she screamed inside her mind. "I've got to wake him up." Chapter 18. The sheriff watched impatiently as Goodman knocked on the door of Peter O'Mahony's home. "Sorry, sir, no answer." "This isn't a social call, Goodman. Kick the goddamn door in." "But we haven't got a warrant. Anything we find inside won't be admissible in court, sir," the overweight officer protested. Williams shook his head. "Trust me, the case will never get to court. Even if we do find somebody to charge, they'll plead insanity, and it'll never go to trial. Now get out of the damn way." Goodman hastily stood aside as the sheriff kicked the door open. Williams drew his sidearm and went inside, Goodman following cautiously. Both of them sniffled the air. "Smells like the Harris place all over again," Goodman commented, gulping to hold down what little remained of his lunch. "It's coming from the kitchen," Williams decided. He advanced along the hallway towards the back of the house, sidearm held in both hands, one finger tightening around the trigger. The sheriff nodded for Goodman to cover him, then burst into the kitchen. "Oh, God," he whispered. "Not another one." Alex reached the door to Lloyd's room, but it would not open. She hammered at the wood, slamming her shoulder against the door. All too aware Kruger was stomping towards her. Alex leaned against the glass panel in the door to see if the lock was bolted shut, like all the other doors. It wasn't, but Roy's bloody corpse was slumped against the door, holding it shut. "That fat fuck got in my way," Kruger snarled as he got closer. "Now he's getting in yours. How ironic." Alex threw herself against the door and succeeded in moving it an inch. Another shove and the gap became half a foot, enough to squeeze an arm inside. She tugged at Roy's shoulder, pulling him to one side. That relieved the pressure against the door, making it easier to move. She glanced back into the hallway to see how close Kruger was, and ducked instinctively as his blade sliced into the door where her head had been moments before. Alex forced herself through the gap and then pushed the door shut again, all too aware of Kruger's fingerknives protruding through the wood. His sickly, scar-ridden features pressed against the glass panel, glaring at her. "This won't stop me, bitch. I don't need my glove to kill you." Alex ran to Lloyd's bedside. He was still in a coma. No evidence of life beyond the bleeping of the life support machines. How do I wake someone from a coma, Alex wondered. What if it kills him? The outcome would be the same whatever the effect of her intervention, she thought. Kruger would lose his power source, his bridge to the world beyond dreams. She reached for the comatose teenager but was stopped by a crusty, rough-skinned hand closing around her throat. Kruger's glove might still be stuck in the door, but its owner was now standing right behind her. "I can kill you with my bare hands," he hissed, his tongue slipping out from behind thin, cruel lips to lick the side of Alex's face. "I prefer to use my finger knives, but if you want, I can do this way, up close and personal." Alex felt his other hand creeping past her stomach, sliding inside her jeans, fingers reaching further down. "Leave her alone, Kruger!" a voice shouted from the window. Alex saw Chris climbing in, his face filled with rage. "Another whelp that needs to be taught a lesson," Kruger whispered in Alex's ear. "You think he's got the hot for you too, bitch?" "I said leave her alone, you motherless bastard!" Chris held out his hands and they burst into flame, fires dancing around each fist. "Or else I'll burn you alive like the people of Elm Street burnt you before." "I gave you that power," Kruger said. "You think I'm afraid of it?" "We'll see," Chris vowed. He pulled back one hand, Alex, get down! She dropped to the floor as Chris flung his blazing fist forward. Flames engulfed Kruger, throwing him backward, smashing him through the wall and out into the corridor. The dirty red and green sweater caught fire, but it was the smell of burning skin that choked Alex's nostrils. Kruger's startled screams filled the air, the sound of a tortured soul burning alive. Chris strode around the bed and crouched beside Alex. Are you okay? She nodded weakly. I had to come back, he said. I had to help you fight him. It was the only way I could think of proving I didn't make a deal with that devil. I'm sorry, she whispered. I was wrong about you. Chris nodded. Where's Peter? I think he's dead, Alex said, admitting it out loud for the first time. Chris straightened up. Enough is enough, he vowed, stepping through the hole created by Kruger's flying body and moving out into the hall. I'm going to deal with this fucker once and for all. Alex watched him go and then turned back to Lloyd. She rested a hand on his shoulder. Lloyd, you've got to wake up, she urged. You've got to help us. Lloyd yawned and stretched. Man, this was some totally excellent shit. He had stumbled into this field like ages ago and found it full of the best grass ever. Some kind soul had taken the trouble of harvesting a bushel of the leaves. Better still, it was dried and ready for rolling, along with a limitless supply of cigarette papers and his trusty Zippo, with the marijuana plant embossed on its side. So Lloyd had done what any red-blooded American teenager with a liking for getting high would do. He sat down, wrote himself the mother of all joints, and indulged in some serious relaxation. This was the fucking life. Forget all that school shit and homework and hassles and, all that shit. Drop out, tune in, and get the fuck off your face. That was the idea of a good time. Lloyd had composed a little song to accompany his pleasure, and he sung it to himself every now and then. Everything seems twice as nice when you're token in a stoner's paradise. Just those two lines over and over again. They never failed to make him smile. Oh, yeah. Sometimes Lloyd felt like there was something he should be doing, but he was too wasted to remember what it was. Maybe he had to be somewhere, but shit, where could be better than here, right? Fucking A. Still, the little voice in the back of his head kept nagging at him. You've got to help us. The sheriff crouched beside the charred body on the kitchen floor. Its clothes had been burnt away, the skin and flesh blackened beyond recognition. But the corpse was obviously Mel. William studied what was left of the face. They were going to need dental records to confirm the identity of this poor bastard, but it looked like Peter O'Mahony was minus a father. Goodman stayed where he was at the other side of the kitchen, keeping plenty of room between him and the burnt remains. You spot something? The sheriff pointed to the back of the corpse's head. This guy was shot through the brain before being set on fire. We could have a copycat killer on our hands. A burst of static heralded a message from dispatch. Williams listened, his brow furrowing. And the coroner is sure about that? Another crackle from the radio. Okay, tell him we've got another one here, same thing. Williams out. Goodman holstered his sidearm and reluctantly joined the sheriff beside the corpse. What did the coroner say? Preliminary examination of the three bodies at the Harris place suggests all of them were shot and killed before they got burned, just like this one. Torching the bodies was an after. The radio cut him off again. Goodman also got the transmission this time. Dispatch to all units, reports of screaming and violence inside the Burns unit at Springwood General. Hospital security unable to gain access. Possible hostage situation. All available units, please respond. That sounds bad, Goodman observed. What do you think is going on? But the sheriff was already running from the kitchen. Chris could see burning footprints on the floor leading away from the annex entrance. The far end of the corridor was dark with no windows or lights, the only illumination provided by the dying flames on the floor. As Chris walked past them, shards of glass broke beneath his shoes. All the light fittings had been smashed. You can't hide, Kruger, Chris snarled. You try to turn us into monsters like you, but we're better than that. Are you sure? The monster hissed from the shadows. We won't kill for you. We won't do your dirty work. Chris stopped, flexing his fist so the flames reignited. We're learning how to use the powers you gave us, but we won't be your fucking puppets. I only need to turn one of you. One was enough. But you failed. You killed Kat and Heather and Peter. But Alex and me, we didn't give in. We beat you. Chris drew back his fist, ready to burn the bastard again. We'll always beat you. Kruger stepped out of the shadows. "Give it your best shot," he replied. Chris threw flames at the murderous maniac, surrounding Kruger in scorching, searing heat, urging the fire to burn hotter than the sun. The monster screamed in pain, howling in agony as it collapsed to the floor. Kruger's cries turned to sobbing, pathetic whimpers for pity. Chris almost felt sorry for him until the sobbing changed again. The figure in the flames stood up, laughing at Chris. "Guess I'm not as flammable as I used to be," Kruger chuckled. "This bastard's not for burning, but you are." He pointed, and a finger of flame spat across the corridor, engulfing the angry teenager. Chris screamed in agony, his high-pitched cries the sound of pain and terror combined. Kruger laughed as Chris fell to his knees, burning alive. "Somebody order a basketball player? Well done!" Chris could no longer scream, having breathed the flames down into his throat and lungs. He twisted on the floor, trying to put out the flames by rolling over and over, but still they burned him. The sound of 4 blades clanging together halted his movements. He turned to face the person wearing the glove with its quartet of finger knives, expecting to see Kruger's gloating face one last time. For a brief moment, Chris looked surprised. "You?" Then the blade stabbed deep into his chest, piercing his heart. Alex was shaking Lloyd by the shoulders, slapping his face as hard as she dared, anything to bring him back to consciousness. But the life support machine's readings stayed stubbornly unchanged. She heard a sound from the corridor. It was like a bowling ball approaching, as if it were rolling along an aisle. Alex glanced through the hole in the wall and saw Chris's head pass by, flames still licking at its surprised features as it rolled onwards. "He's hot stuff!" Kruger's voice quipped from out of view. The monster's gloved hand appeared at the edge of the hole, its bloody blades grasping the wall, wrapping around the jagged perimeter. Alex edged away around the bed, putting it between herself and Kruger. "But I guess he won't be scoring any time soon." "Lloyd," Alex whispered, "this is our last chance. It's just you and me now." "That's where you're wrong," Kruger replied. The figure from the corridor stepped into view, but it wasn't Kruger wearing the glove. It was Peter. "Your boyfriend's still in the game, too." Lloyd sat up in the field of weed. Damn it. It was clouding over. What happened to his summer days, man? All this good shit going to waste with nobody to help me smoke it? Lloyd shook his head. Maybe he should get going. Nah, let's have one more joint. What harm could it do, right? Williams abandoned his car outside the hospital and ran inside, drawing his sidearm. Behind him, 6 more police vehicles arrived, all summoned from the crime scenes on Elm Street. On his way there, the sheriff had cursed himself for not personally following up Mrs. Corwin's suggestion that Alex might have come to the hospital. They had known the boy who ripped off his own face, Lloyd Reeves, was in the burns unit here. Williams felt in his gut they'd find Alex Corwin in the boy's room. But why was the annex sealed off? Who was holding the other patients hostage? Alex had kept saying Kruger was involved, but the sheriff hadn't wanted to believe that. What if she was right? He stormed into the reception area, closely followed by 20 uniformed cops, all armed and ready for trouble. "Which way to the burns unit?" The head of the hospital security stepped forward, introducing himself as Nathan Briggs and volunteering to show the way. "Have you pulled back all your men like I ordered?" Sheriff Williams barked as they ran. "Yes. We're watching the entrance from a safe distance. Nobody's gone in or out since we called you." "How many patients are in there?" 15, Briggs said. "When we couldn't get through the security doors, I sent men to look in the windows. They reported at least one fatality, a patient called Stephanie Rudge. Looked like she was attacked by someone with a handful of knives. The other patients are trapped in the rooms. The windows are sealed shut, and so are the doors. We tried breaking in, but..." "But what?" "The windows won't break. I know, it sounds stupid, but we can't smash the glass. No matter how hard we try, it's almost unnatural." Almost supernatural, the sheriff thought to himself. Briggs slowed as they approached a darkened area. Ahead, 2 nervous-looking men from hospital security were peering around a corner. "The burns unit is the next left. All lights have gone out in the hallway and we haven't seen anything moving." Williams paused and waited for the rest of his men to arrive, giving himself a chance to catch his breath. "Good. All hospital security staff should go back to the reception area. If we need any help, we'll call you." Briggs nodded. Once his men were out of earshot, Briggs leaned closer to the sheriff. I did get a glimpse of someone moving in there. He had knives instead of fingers. I thought you should know what you're up against. Thanks, Williams said. Once Briggs was gone, the sheriff looked around the corner at the double doors. The corridor beyond was almost pitch black. The reinforced glass door panels were cracked, but they didn't look like they would give away any time soon. They were going to need another way in. It was on the ground floor, so there wasn't any easy underground access available to them. Williams looked up at the ceiling tiles. Somebody get me a chair. Peter? Alex stared at her lover, unable to grasp what she was seeing. I thought you were dead. I had to punish him for trying to challenge my authority, Kruger replied, speaking through the boy's body. He's forgot. We made a deal. No, he would never. Her words trailed off uncertainly. Wouldn't he? Kruger laughed at Alex's confusion. Don't you remember, bitch? You were there. I let you witness the whole pretty thing. I thought that was Chris. So the cliché's true. Love is blind. Aw. Peter stepped through the hole and into Lloyd's room, his right hand flexing the glove, twitching the finger knives. Drops of blood fell from each of the blades, staining Peter's jeans. This little shit was so scared, he was willing to do anything to save his ass. I don't believe you, Alex said. He didn't kill Kat, of course. That was all my work. But with Heather, Peter was more than an equal partner in that piece of butchery. He's quite adept with a knife, given the chance. No wonder you've got such a soft spot for him, Alex. You're lying. Are you sure? Kruger chuckled softly. Getting him to kill his father was all too easy. But murdering the Harris family, that proved a little more difficult. He couldn't take all three at once, so I made him shoot them first, and then torch the lot. Why? You would have figured out who betrayed you sooner or later, but I wanted to keep you guessing, give myself time to grow stronger. Peter's lips opened and closed in time with Kruger's words, like a full-sized human puppet, operated by invisible strings, by an invisible master. He held up the 4 blades, each edge a glistening crimson. It gave me time to get rid of Chris as well. That leaves the 2 of us, and you and I, Alex, we're old friends. You know I wouldn't lie to you. I've never lied to you, have I? Her head sank forward, beaten. No, she admitted. You want to know the best part of all of this? Alex didn't reply. You inviting Peter into bed while I was lurking inside him, taking me in your hands, letting me touch you down there. Peter licked his lips in a grotesque parody of passion. You were so sweet, like cherry pie. I think I'd like another slice, Alex. She shook her head. You stay away from me. You know you want it too. You want me to hurt you, bitch. You want me to cut you, the same way you like cutting yourself. I don't do that anymore, Alex insisted. Peter beckoned her closer with the finger knives. Come to Daddy, Alex. I said stay away from me, you bastard, she screamed. That's no way to talk to your boyfriend, Kruger said, chiding her. Not when we've been so intimate with each other. I can't believe I gave myself to a creep like you. Peter played his part perfectly. The timid virgin, too scared to take the initiative. Kruger laughed. He began imitating Peter's voice. I wasn't sure if this was another nightmare, whether it was real, whether you were real. What a crock of shit. And you fell for it. You spread your legs like the whore you are. God, I feel sick, Alex murmured. But you'll always be Daddy's little girl. Kruger's voice continued. Peter held out his arms as if waiting to be embraced. Come and give Daddy a hug. Don't make me do this, she pleaded. If you want to kill me, just get it over with. Who said anything about killing you? You're going to be my very special little girl from now on. Dead or alive, Alex, you'll always be mine. Peter advanced towards her, hands reaching out, the 4 blades hungry to cut her. Peter, I know you're still in there somewhere, Alex said quietly. You've got to help me fight Kruger, Alex said. Peter's gone, bitch. Fight him, Peter. You don't have to give in. Get ready for Freddy! Peter lunged at Alex, finger knives slicing through the air. She jumped sideways, the blades tearing through the fabric of her top, but not her skin, yet. Peter moved another step closer, jamming Alex against the life support machines clustered around Lloyd's bed. That's it. Fight back. I always prefer it when I have to take my bitches by force. Alex grabbed one of the monitor screens and threw it at Peter, catching him full in the chest and sending him staggering backwards. That gave her enough time to scramble over Lloyd and escape through the hole in the wall, out into the corridor. She ran towards the double doors, but they still refused to open. Alex hammered her fist against the cracked glass. Help me, for the love of God! Somebody help me! A nervous cop emerged from the shadow outside the Burns unit, trembling hands clutching his sidearm. Alex recognized him. It was the same officer who'd ignored her when she first tried to tell someone about Kruger. What was his name? Goodfellow? Goodwin? Officer Goodman! You've got to open these doors! You've got to let me out! I can't! He shouted back. Sheriff's orders! Nobody's allowed in or out! Fuck your orders! Alex screamed in frustration. There's a maniac in here with me. He's already killed 2 people, and he's going to kill me next! Goodman shrugged helplessly and retreated back into the shadows. Alex slammed her fist against the doors. Come back here and help me, you fucking coward! Looks like it's just you and me, Kruger's voice announced. Alex spun round but couldn't see him or Peter in the darkened corridor. I need a weapon, she thought quickly. I need a way to hurt Kruger, to defend myself. She ran into Roy's office. The long-bladed scissors were still resting on the desk. Alex grabbed them with both hands. She could hear someone creeping along the corridor towards the office. Come out, little bitch! Daddy wants to play! Williams was first to climb into the ventilation shaft, his movements hampered by the bulky Kevlar vest. The sheriff never asked one of his officers to do something he wasn't willing to do himself. Lead by example and you'll earn people's respect. That was his policy. Didn't stop him being scared, but it was something to cling on to in situations like this. The crawl space was like a horizontal metal chimney, scarcely 2 foot by 2 foot. Get stuck in here and you need cutting equipment to get out again. He could feel the anxiety of childhood claustrophobia creeping up his spine. Concentrate on the job in hand, he told himself, and began crawling. It was only a dozen yards to the Burns unit entrance, with another 10 feet to the first ventilation grating. Reach that and they should be able to pop the vent and drop down inside. A sudden squawk of static from the radio startled him. William's head sprang upward, slamming into the metal roof of the ventilation shaft, with a dull thud. Shit! He clawed a hand towards his radio. Hellfire, Goodman, I said maintain radio silence unless the situation at ground level changed, the sheriff hissed. Has it? Sorry, sir, but the Corwin girl came to the double doors. She wanted me to let her out. Said there was a maniac in there with her. Claimed there'd been 2 murders so far and she'd be the next victim. Where is she now? Let me speak to her. I can't. She ran back along the corridor into the dark. Good work, Goodman, Williams snarled sarcastically. Thank you, sir. Don't call me again. The sheriff switched off his radio before calling to the men behind him. Okay, let's move on. The cops resumed their awkward crawl along the ventilation shaft. Alex waited until the approaching footsteps were almost outside the office. She dropped into a crouching position by the door, the scissors clutched in her hand ready to attack. When the silhouette of her tormentor stepped into view, she stabbed the scissors into his stomach with all her strength, twisting the blades savagely before pulling them out. Peter staggered back from the doorway, disbelief on his face. Bloody hands held over the jagged wound in his stomach. Alex, you stabbed me, he whispered before collapsing to the floor. She looked at him and realized Kruger's glove was gone from his hand. That bastard had tricked her again, sent Peter to find her knowing she would attack him. Peter! She gasped, scrambling out into the corridor. Alex crouched beside him, the scissors still clenched in her right hand. I didn't know it was you. I thought Kruger was inside you. He was, Peter said weakly, his face drained of color. I tried to fight him, but he was too strong and I was so scared. So scared, Alex. His eyes rolled back into his head. Alex leaned over him, pressing her lips to his forehead. It's okay, she said quietly. Everything's going to be okay now. Peter didn't reply. His breathing grew shallower until only the faintest gasp of air was being drawn into his lips. Beneath him, a pool of blood spread slowly outward. Then he stopped breathing altogether and was gone. Alex let her tears fall on him, not caring any more about fighting Kruger, or being brave, or even about the future. None of that mattered now. In Lloyd's room, Kruger was standing over the bed, his gloved hand caressing the teenager's bandaged face. "I won't be needing you much longer," Kruger said. "Soon I'll have a replacement ready." The finger knife stretched across the bed and began slicing through the cables connecting Lloyd to his life support machines. One by one, the monitors fell silent, their screens going blank. Kruger leaned close to the dying youth. "See you in hell, fucker." Suddenly it was pitch dark in the field, like there was a total eclipse of the sun. Lloyd abandoned his latest joint and stood up. What the fuck was going on? Couldn't a man have a smoke in peace? Man, this sucked. He stomped off across the field, looking for someone to complain to. Up ahead, Lloyd could make out a building in the darkness, its shell lit up from within by queasy yellow steam. Maybe whoever's in there knows what's going on. Alex was still grieving for Peter when she heard sheet metal flexing nearby. She looked up and was startled to see a familiar face watching her from a ventilation grating in the ceiling. "Sheriff Williams, what are you doing?" He motioned her to be quieter, holding a finger to his lips. "What's happening in there?" he hissed. She moved closer to the grill. "It's Kruger. He's found a way of escaping from our dreams. He's here in the Burns unit." The sheriff pointed at Peter's body. "Who killed the boy?" Alex realized she was still holding the bloody scissors. "I thought he was Kruger," she admitted. "Kruger was possessing him. He used Peter to kill Heather and Chris's family." "So you killed Peter?" "I didn't realize Kruger had let him go," she insisted. "Stay where you are," Williams said. "We're coming in." "No," Alex replied. "I've got Kruger trapped in here with me. If you come in, he'll escape again. I've got to face him. I've got to confront him." The sheriff produced his sidearm and aimed it at her. "Put the scissors down, Alex, and step away from the body." "For fuck's sake, I told you. Peter was possessed by Kruger. I had to kill him. It was self-defense." "The courts will determine that," Williams maintained. "Now put the scissors down and step away from the body. Everything's going to be all right." "Jesus, you think I did all this?" Alex shook her head, slowly backing away from the ventilation grill. "It was Kruger. Don't you get it?" "Alex, come back here," the sheriff warned. "I will shoot you if I have to." She turned and ran back towards Lloyd's room. "Shit!" Williams squeezed his head sideways to talk to the men behind him. "That's it. We're going in now." Alex ran back into Lloyd's room to find Kruger standing on the other side of the bed, his arms folded, a triumphant sneer on his scarred, bestial face. "You're too late if you want to wake him up," Kruger said. "He's out of it. For good." The monitors around the bed were all dead, every wire and power cable sliced through. There was no sign of movement from Lloyd, his face gray and lifeless. "You bastard, you didn't have to kill him too," Alex said. "He's not dead. Not yet," Kruger replied. "But I don't need him anymore. I've got you as my little soldier in the world." "I'll never kill for you," Alex vowed. The maniac smiled. "Tell that to Peter, bitch." "You tricked me. I thought he was still possessed." "You thought? Who said you could think?" Kruger demanded, slowly rocking around the bed towards her. "I control you, Alex. Every word, every movement, everything you do. All of it is at my command." "No, you're wrong," she said, shaking her head. "How can you be so sure? How do you even know all of this isn't some delusion conjured up in your warped, twisted little mind?" "I know what's real and what isn't," Alex maintained, but she could feel doubt creeping into her thoughts, into her voice. Kruger held up his finger knives. "Are these real? Did I use these to cut you, or did you cut yourself?" Alex held up the scissors from Roy's office. "These are real enough. They'll hurt when I stick them through your black heart, you bastard." "Be my guest," Kruger said, throwing his arms wide and smiling. Alex stabbed the scissors at his chest, but they passed straight through, swishing into thin air and coming out the other side. The sheriff was first to lower himself into the corridor, dropping to the floor and taking a position against one wall while the others followed his lead. Once half a dozen men were in, they began to move slowly among the corridor, checking doors and locks as they went. The office was empty. Peter's dead body sprawled in front of the door. Further on, they found Stephanie Rudge's corpse in her room, just as hospital security had described. All the other doors were sealed shut, but the patients inside them seemed unharmed. It was Williams who found the decapitated head, accidentally kicking it across the floor in the dark. "What the fuck was that?" he hissed. Another officer bent down and came up with the head in his hands, almost dropping it again in surprise. The hair and skin had been burnt off the head, the features twisted in a screaming rictus of death. "Put that down again," Williams ordered, "and try not to fall over the rest of the corpse when we find it." Raised voices echoed along the corridor. The sheriff gestured for his men to stop moving, then listened. He could hear Alex shouting, but the words were not distinct, as if someone was choking her. Whatever was happening, she wasn't alone. Williams nodded to the others, and they resumed their progress along the corridor, creeping forward. Kruger had Alex by the throat, his left hand lifting her off the floor. "Is this real enough for you?" he asked, holding the pointed end of one of his blades, less than an inch from her right eye. "You still think it'll be a trick after I gouge your eyeball out of its socket?" A muffled sound from the corridor took his attention. "Sounds like we've got company. Let's continue this at my place. What do you say?" "Go to hell," Alex gasped, struggling for breath. "That's the idea, bitch." Kruger threw Alex backwards across the room, so she thudded headfirst into the wall beside Lloyd's bed. She slumped to the floor, unconscious. Kruger smiled. "Now we play on my turf," he said happily. Chapter 19. Alex hit the boiler room floor with a thump, the metal surface forcing the air from her lungs, winding her. She lay among the rust and oil stains, gasping for breath, trying to get her bearings. I must have blacked out, she realized. I'm back in Kruger's domain. Oh God, he's 10 times as strong here and nobody's going to wake me up. I'm trapped. Her mouth filled with the bitter taste as adrenaline kicked in. Fight or flight, that was the animal instinct. Well, if I can't run, I'll have to fight. Alex knew she needed a weapon. Her hands were empty. She must have dropped the scissors when she hit the wall. She glanced around the boiler room, but could not see anything useful through the creeping clouds of steam, queasy yellow lighting blending everything together. The ear-piercing sound of metal scraping across metal cut through her nerves like a knife. He was close and getting closer. Alex could feel his excitement, his breath coming in quick gasps, the black blood coursing through his veins. Shit! Why had she gotten such a useless power from the experimental serum? Chris could throw fucking fire. Peter had been able to send objects flying across a room. What did I end up with? Feeling what others did? Sharing their emotions? Fat lot of use that was, Alex told herself. Then she said to herself, I need to stop whining. If that's what you've got to use it. If I can feel what Kruger feels, maybe I can figure out what he's planning to do next. And I can use that knowledge against him. You're welcome to try, he sneered from behind her, but I wouldn't count on it. Kruger lunged at Alex with his fingernails, stabbing at her. She threw herself sideways, scrambling through a narrow gap between two large metal cylinders. Ahead was a staircase, leading further down into the neglected industrial complex. Behind her, the monster was laughing. Hide and seek! 2 can play that game! He vanished. A Kruger-shaped hole left behind in the steam clouds. Before that, too, was gone. Lloyd wandered through the building, but couldn't find anyone else. The place appeared to be an abandoned steelworks. All the machinery rusted to hell. There was nobody here, he decided. But if that was the case, where was the light I saw earlier? Lloyd noticed a doorway hidden away in a corner, steam drifting out of it. In the Burns unit, Williams was silently cursing his men for making so much noise. The voices in the room ahead had fallen silent a few seconds ago. Since then, nothing. The sheriff held his sidearm out, ready to fire at whatever he found, and stepped in front of the hole in the wall. Through the gap, he could see a male patient on a bed, not much more than a teenager. All the wires and power cables nearby had been severed, probably by those scissors Williams had seen Alex holding earlier. There was no sign of the girl, or of anybody else. The sheriff stepped in through the hole, checking the corners, keeping a close watch for sudden movement. But none came. Alex had disappeared. Shit! Williams relaxed and called his men forward. Fan out and begin searching this place properly. 2 by 2, one room at a time. Look in every corner. I want every shadow checked twice. That girl must be here somewhere. Find her. Alex turned back from the staircase, deciding to search for a weapon instead. She wasn't going to play Kruger's games anymore. A long glint of metal on the floor caught her eye, a hollow pole almost as tall as her. One end was formed into a shovel, the other finished in a sharp spike. Maybe it had been some kind of stoking device? Whatever, it was a weapon and one she could lift. What's the matter? Don't you want to play? Kruger's voice goaded her from out of sight, snaking into her thoughts. Come out and face me. I'm not afraid of you anymore. You should be, he replied. You should fear me most of all. Why? You're a phantom, a ghost that doesn't even know when it's dead. You're only strong because we give you that strength. You're nothing without us. As long as there are children on Elm Street, I will always be strong. I am eternal, like fear itself. I can never be beaten. You died once, you can die again, Alex promised. Even if you could kill me, I would only rise up again. That drug trial was the first of many. I'll find other victims, other hosts. Kruger stepped from the shadows. Don't make the mistake of thinking you're unique, bitch. I've had plenty of whores like you in my time. Yeah? Alex stabbed at Kruger with her weapon, plunging the spiked end up through his neck and out the back of his skull, knocking the fedora from his head. He howled, a mixture of rage and pain, hands clawing at his neck. Well, how does it feel to be on the receiving end for once? Alex demanded. She rotated the pole in her hands, letting it twist around inside his brain. How does it feel to get royally screwed, Kruger? He grabbed the section of pole in front of him with both hands and began swinging it from side to side, smashing Alex against a wall to her left, then across and into a metal handrail on her right. She cried in pain and let go, crumpling to the rusty floor. Kruger leaned backwards and began removing the spike from his head, pulling it out a few inches at a time, retracting it until the end came free of his neck, wet with black blood. He examined the weapon that had been skewing him before tossing it aside. You should be more careful, he said snidely. You could have put someone's eye out with that. Kruger marched across the boiler room and grabbed a hold of Alex, lifting her off the floor with his gloved hand. The blades hooked into her top, tearing at her fabric, threatening to cut through it altogether and stab into her body. Kruger drew Alex's face close to his, spittle flecking his lips as he hissed into her mouth. Give Daddy a kiss, sweetheart. Then his mouth was clamped over hers, his fetid breath invading her lungs, his rasping serpent of a tongue pushing between her lips, exploring her mouth, probing every crevice. Kruger pulled his face away from Alex and smiled broadly, revealing the blackened stumps of his rotting, decayed teeth. And they say the age of romance is dead. Alex coughed twice, then spat the contents of her mouth into his face. Fuck you, asshole, she muttered. Kruger shook his head sidely from side to side. I guess they were right. He began slapping her in the face with his left hand, first with the palm, then with the back of his hand, over and over, blow upon blow. Each one harder than the last, more savage, more brutal. Alex lost count and knew only that she was being beaten to death by this bastard. She could feel darkness closing in around her. No, 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 Kruger bellowed, shaking her awake. You don't get away from me that easily, slut. I've got you forever. Remember. Besides, I've got a little secret I want to share. Lloyd was walking down a spiral staircase into the billowing cloud of steam when he heard the voices. One of them he recognized from somewhere. It was a girl's voice. Somebody he'd met at school, perhaps. Yeah. What was her name again? Annie? Eileen? No. It was Alex. That was it. Alex. What was she doing down here? The other voice was a man, deep and rasping, half metal, half gravel. Lloyd had heard this guy before as well, but couldn't remember from where. He reached the bottom of the staircase. The voices were a lot closer now. They were arguing, the man threatening Alex, taunting her. Lloyd didn't know if he wanted to get involved in this. It sounded like a bad scene. Then recalled where he had heard the male voice before. A flash of realization washed over Lloyd, shocking him from his daze. "I remember," he whispered. "That bastard who took my face. It's him." Another memory jump cut into his head. He was lying on a bed as the monster stood over him, cutting through the life support systems. "I won't be needing you much longer. Soon I'll have a replacement ready." "I'm dying," Lloyd realized. All those days he'd spent shit-faced in that field, he'd really been lying on a hospital bed, out of his head on sedatives. The maniac attacking Alex condemned me to death. Kruger switched hands so his left kept a hold of Alex, while the gloved hand explored her body. The blade slid across her skin, stroking, caressing, almost tender in their movements, if not for the implied threat of the razor-sharp edges. "I've got a replacement for Lloyd ready. Someone who will give me permanent access to the dreams of children, everywhere." "I'll never work for you, Kruger," Alex vowed, peering at him through swollen eyelids. Her face was already bruising badly from the beating he had given her. "Keep me here forever, torture me all you want, but I'll never give in." "I believe you," he said. "I had someone else in mind. You'll never guess who it is." Before he could say any more, a berserk scream echoed around the boiler room, and a shape threw itself at Kruger. Alex fell to the floor, released from the maniac's grasp. She looked up to see someone clinging to Kruger's back, arms wrapped around the monster's head and neck, trying to throttle him. A familiar face appeared over Kruger's shoulder, smiling down at her. "Lloyd?" "Alex, you've got to get out of here," he shouted. Kruger slashed his blades across Lloyd's arm, slicing through skin and flesh, cutting deep into the bone, bringing a scream of pain from his attacker. "Get off me, you little shit!" Kruger snarled, hacking at Lloyd, twisting round and round, trying to shake him off. But Lloyd clung on tenaciously, still calling to Alex between cries of pain. "This fucker's been lying to you. Kill me and he can't hurt you anymore. He can't hurt anyone." "But what about you? I can't leave you here," Alex protested. "I'm already dying. Kruger made sure of that," Lloyd shouted back. "Get out of here. I'll keep him busy." Alex nodded, looking for some way of waking herself up, searching the floor for something to hurt herself with, hoping that would shock her back to consciousness. But there was nothing. Behind her, Kruger had gotten a hold of Lloyd and roughly tossed the teenager to one side. The maniac turned and ran at Alex, his finger knives reaching for her. She threw up a hand to defend herself, and 3 of the blades stabbed through it, slicing between her bones. Alex screamed in agony and came to on the floor beside Lloyd's bed. Blood spurted from the 3 wounds in her hand, spraying Alex in the face. She saw the scissors lying on the floor beneath the bed and grabbed them in her good hand, clutching the handle firmly in her grasp. There was movement out in the corridor, the sound of men talking. The cops must have come in through the ventilation shaft while I was unconscious. "I've still got time," she realized. Alex looked at Lloyd. His body was in spasm, twitching and fighting. Every moment he made in the dream world reflected here on the bed. Alex knew what she had to do. At any moment, Kruger could burst into this reality. She knew killing Lloyd was the right thing to do, that he was already dying, that it would make no difference to him, and she knew what she had to do was inevitable, the fulfillment of Kat's vision for this moment. Alex pulled the scissors into the air, preparing to plunge them down into Lloyd's chest, but she couldn't go through with it. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I just can't do it." Williams heard the whispered words from out in the corridor. His men had searched every inch of the Burns unit, with the exception of those rooms still sealed off by some unknown force. There was no sign of Alex Corwin, no sign of anybody else here, and certainly no sign of Kruger. The sheriff was about to give up when he heard the girl speaking. Shit! She must have doubled back, got past them somehow. The sheriff crept towards the hole in the wall, his sidearm raised, finger at the ready to fire. Through the gap he could see the girl standing beside the bed, her back to him, that same pair of scissors as before held up in the air. At any moment she could stab them into the teenage boy. The patient was convulsing on the bed. "Freeze!" Williams commanded. "This is Sheriff Williams, Alex. I have you covered with my weapon. You can't escape." "I'm not trying to escape," she replied, not moving. "I want you to drop those scissors before someone else gets hurt." "Can't do that." Drop those scissors or I'll be forced to take preventative action, Alex. I have to kill him, Sheriff, she said, her voice eerily calm. Why? What's Lloyd ever done to you? You wouldn't understand. Try me. The sheriff motioned for two of his men to take positions on either side of him, covering the girl with their weapons. Once they were in place, Williams lowered his own sidearm. Why do you have to kill your friend? Kruger is using him to attack us. As long as Lloyd remains alive, we can never be safe. Alex, that doesn't make sense. Murder can never be justified. Lloyd's already dying, she said. He told me so in my nightmare. See how he's twitching? That's Lloyd fighting Kruger in the dream world. He told me to do this, Sheriff. It isn't murder. It's a mercy killing. He's dying because you cut his life support systems. Everything else? You're sick, Alex. You're not thinking straight. That drug they gave you, it must have been a bad batch. You'll be able to claim temporary insanity, diminished responsibility. I promise. This will never go to trial. Now why don't you put those scissors down and we'll get the doctors in here and see if they can save Lloyd, okay? Alex could feel the strength draining from her hand. Tears were streaming down her face. She knew what she had to do, but finding the strength to do it, that was the hardest part. Talking with the sheriff, that was just a distraction. Suddenly Lloyd opened his eyes and looked at her. But when he spoke, it wasn't with his own voice. It was Kruger talking. You're too late, bitch! I don't need this body anymore. He started laughing at her, mocking and taunting her, goading her with his voice. Fuck you, Kruger! She screamed and stabbed the scissors down into Lloyd's chest with every last ounce of strength. Alex collapsed forward over his body, hugging him as he died beneath her. I'm sorry, Lloyd. I'm so sorry. Epilogue. Joyce drove through the streets of Springwood, admiring the leaves of ochre and brown as they tumbled from the tree along the roadside. Autumn had come with surprising swiftness this year, cold winds blasting across Lake Erie from the Canadian border. Soon it would be winter and the town would be fighting through snow and sleet and ice. Life went on, the seasons replacing one another as they always had. If you didn't know any better, you would think that this was a typical American town, no different from any other. Joyce turned her car into the long tree-lined avenue, with which she was becoming so familiar. Hard to believe it was 5 months since the events of that terrible week. Since her world had fallen apart in an orgy of violence and death. 5 months since Alex was arrested, and charged with the murders of 8 people. Most of them her classmates from school. The resultant news media feeding frenzy had broken over this town like a storm, with camera crews and reporters flying in from around the world to get their own piece of the story. How did a teenage girl become such a cold-blooded killer? Why did she choose such outlandish methods of slaying her victims? And what did these brutal murders have to say about the state of American society? At least Joyce had been spared the horror of reliving it all in court during the long months of a trial. A team of psychiatrists had examined Alex and concluded she was clinically insane, putting any prospect of a trial beyond question. Instead, Joyce's little girl had been committed to spend the rest of her natural life incarcerated at psychiatric institutions, preferably those with maximum security quarters. So once a week, Joyce made her way up the long drive to Weston Hills, the hospital where Alex was being kept now. She didn't know how much longer she could face making the journey. Alex hadn't said a word since being arrested in the Burns unit at Springwood General, moments after killing her final victim. There had been questions about the conduct of the police. Why hadn't they acted sooner to stop her? Why was the teen terror, as the tabloids like to call her, allowed to claim one last life? Sheriff Williams had been forced to resign for not stopping Alex when he'd had the chance. Joyce almost wished he or his men had pulled the trigger and killed her. At least Alex would have been out of her misery then. At least I wouldn't have to come here and see what is left of my daughter. She thought all this while parking her car. It was being repossessed tomorrow. Joyce had lost her job. Nobody wanted to employ the single mother of a mass murderer. Since Alex wasn't fit to stand trial, Joyce felt she had been judged guilty by the court of public opinion instead. Hate mail cluttered the letterbox at 1428 Elm Street, along with dog excrement and God knows what else. She'd been forced to move out, living like a fugitive in different motels. Her life was falling apart around her, and there was nothing she could do about it. The people of this town would never forgive what her daughter had done, and they would certainly never forget it. Unless Alex gives me some sort of sign today, I won't be coming back, Joyce decided. If she would just acknowledge my presence, even notice there was somebody else there, I'd feel like I wasn't wasting my time. I know it seems like I'm abandoning you, Alex, Joyce thought as she walked into the main entrance, but I've got to have a sign. Otherwise, I might as well leave. The town, the state, hell, even the country. I've still got to have a life, even if you've given up on yours. It took Joyce 20 minutes to get through all the security procedures at Weston Hill's maximum security wing. Officially, these were meant to ensure none of the inmates could ever escape and that none of their friends could facilitate any attempt to break out. In Alex's case, it was as much for her own safety. Death threats were still arriving, and their dozens and dozens each week. And 2 parcel bombs had been sent for her. Plainly, those that wanted her dead didn't bother to read anything more demanding than the supermarket tabloids. Otherwise, they'd have seen articles about Alex's catatonic state. She wasn't given any mail because she didn't read any mail. She didn't read anything. Joyce was ushered into the small square room by an orderly in a white shirt and pants. The ceiling, floor, and all the walls were white except the one Joyce was facing. That was reinforced inch-thick glass, with a black blind drawn down over it. The air was scented with faint traces of sandalwood and lavender, pumped in through the ventilation system. Recent research had suggested such smells could help pacify the most violent of patients. There were no windows or skylights anywhere in maximum security at Weston Hills. They would only torment the inmates. The orderly brought in a chair for her and then retreated to the door. "Ready?" the orderly asked. Joyce nodded, taking a deep breath. The orderly hit a button on the wall beside the door. Motors whirred into life, and the thick black blind began slowly retracting into the ceiling, inch by inch, revealing the room on the other side of the glass. "You need anything, just knock on the door," the orderly said, as he always said. "I'll be right outside." He backed out through the door, locking it after himself, not looking at what the visitor had come to see. Joyce steeled herself, but was still shocked by Alex's appearance. Her daughter was secured inside a straitjacket, the white sleeves wrapped around her torso, pinning her arms to her sides. Below the waist she was wearing a pair of white pajama bottoms, stained with blood and God knows what else. Her hair had not been cut in 5 months. The orderly once told Joyce that Alex became uncontrollably violent whenever she saw scissors or any type of blades, and was now past shoulder length, spilling in front of her face. As Joyce watched, her daughter twisted a foot around so she could chew the toenails. Alex was being kept in a padded cell, every surface except the reinforced glass wall, heavily upholstered and covered with coarse canvas. Once visiting time was over, the glass would be covered by another padded wall to ensure the inmate's safety. After gnawing at her toenails for more than a minute, Alex had fashioned one of them into a jagged edge. Joyce watched horrified as her daughter dug this freshly created edge into the opposite foot, drawing blood. Once the red liquid began to drip, Alex twisted round so she was lying on her back. Lifting the bloody foot into the air, Alex used it to start writing a word on the nearest padded wall. Judging from the many messages scrawled on the walls in red, this was a common activity for her daughter, but it still distressed Joyce. She went to the door and knocked, calling to the orderly. "She's doing it again," Joyce said quietly. He nodded and closed the door again. Joyce didn't watch when 2 other orderlies entered the padded cell. She tried not to listen to her daughter's wordless howls of protest as the foot wound was dressed and restraints were put on Alex's legs. Only once the orderlies had gone did Joyce look at her again. "Alex, it's Mom. How are you feeling today?" The teenage girl did not respond, drool appearing at her lips and then running down her chin. "Honey, I know this isn't easy for you, but it isn't easy for me either." Alex hummed a little to herself, head rocking from side to side. "I need you to give me a sign, some indication you even know I'm here. I know it's a lot to ask, but I need it." No response. "Please, Alex, I can't keep coming here unless you give me hope. I've lost my job, the house. The car's being taken tomorrow. But I'd keep coming back no matter what it cost. If you'd give me a sign, anything at all." Alex rolled over into a corner and then used the 2 walls as a brace to lift herself up to her feet. She staggered across the uneven surface of the padded floor, moving closer to the glass wall. Joyce moved nearer the glass too, hoping against hope her prayers were being answered. "Alex, honey, If you can hear me, just nod. I'll know, okay? Alex leaned against the glass and began licking its surface with her tongue, saliva rolling down towards the floor. Joyce began crying, unable to hold herself together any longer. Please, Alex, give me some hope. But her daughter did not respond, content to keep licking the glass wall. All right, Joyce said, finally drying her eyes. I'm leaving now. I don't know when I'll be back, if ever. I hope you're happy in whatever world you've retreated to. I do hope so. She knocked on the door and the orderly let her out. Joyce didn't look back. A few minutes later, the orderly returned to collect the chair. He paused and looked at the young woman pressing her face against the glass partition. The swell of her pregnancy was becoming obvious, even through the straitjacket. The news she was carrying a baby emerged during pre-sentencing psychiatric testing, and had added one more layer of scandal and intrigue to this infamous case. Nobody knew who the father was, Mrs. Corwin insisting her daughter was still a virgin despite medical evidence to the contrary. "How's my favorite bitch feeling today?" he whispered to her, evil eyes glinting with pleasure, the kindly face slipping for a moment to reveal another set of features. "I told you I had a replacement ready for that loser Lloyd. I hope our child isn't hurting you too much with his kicking and clawing. He's a feisty little fucker, isn't he? Takes after his old man. Still, only a few months to go." He laughed at her and then let himself out of the visitor's room. Alex staggered across the padded cell and leaned against the far wall, her gaze sliding over the words that she had painstakingly written with her own blood. 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. 3, 4, better lock your door. Inside Alex's womb, the fetus stirred, conscious of its father being close, so very close. Its hands stretched against the soft tissue surroundings, tiny fingernails clawing and scratching for a way out. The fetus's evil eyes opened and looked around, glinting with pleasure. Yes, this little bastard was a spitting image of its father. The end. Okay, this has been the conclusion of A Nightmare on Elm Street, Suffer the Children, an original novel by David Bishop. I hope everybody's enjoyed it. It's been a pretty good story. My review of it would be, it was really enjoyable. It was a real good Freddy story. I think the writer had the source material down pat. I just couldn't wait to read this again every day. That's why I couldn't wait till tomorrow to finish it. I had to finish it today. Again, if you haven't done so already, subscribe, drop some comments, click that like button. Click the bell for future updates on upcoming chapters. I'm going to be starting a Jason X novel next, Jason X The Experiment by Pat Cadigan. Remember, if you'll answer in the comments section what Kat's hairstyle was, as in what color did she dye her hair, answer it correctly, and you might be the subscriber that wins my copy of this book, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Suffer the Children. So, in the comments, answer the question, what was Kat's favorite hairstyle? How did she wear her hair in this book? And with that, we're done. I will see you all when I begin Jason X The Experiment. I look forward to your comments and your subscriptions, your likes. I can't wait to delve into Jason X. Really looking forward to it. Till next time, have a great night. Sleep well.